Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. US President Donald Trump has warned of 100% import tariffs on BRICS countries if they took any steps towards cutting the use of the dollar in global trade and making their own currency. However, during his speech, Trump reiterated that this statement should not be seen as a threat, but rather as a clear stance on the issue. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar concluded his bilateral trip to the United States and is upbeat about the future between the two nations. Speaking at a press conference after meeting with his counterpart Marco Rubio, the minister said that the new Trump administration has clear interest to take the relationship between India and the US forward. What would the Modi government and Trump administration want from the India-US relationship, and what could be the areas of alignment and areas of friction? Joining us now to take this forward is Vikas Swarup, former Indian ambassador to Canada. Ambassador Swarup, thank you very much for joining us on Global Eye. Let me begin by asking you, do you think India has been successful in making early outreach with the Trump administration? We had the first bilateral soon after Marco Rubio got off the inauguration ceremony.
Absolutely. I think India has been very quick off the block. If you remember, Prime Minister Modi was probably among the first few leaders to call up President Trump on his election victory. And then the fact that our foreign minister was there at the inauguration, and the first bilateral meeting that Marco Rubio had after his confirmation was with our external affairs minister, I think itself speaks volumes for the priority that the Trump administration is going to accord to India. And most importantly, I think the personal rapport that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have, which we saw very clearly during the Namaste Trump and Howdy Modi events in America and India respectively. I think that augurs very well for the future of the India-US relationship. I think India will be a very, very important part of US foreign policy going forward. And I think President Trump will attach a considerable deal of importance to expanding the relationship with India.
So when we heard him speaking at Davos, it was quite clear that he has put the domestic agenda first, perhaps even stronger than his first term in power. What do you think he will want from countries like India?
I think his priorities will be very, very clear, and these priorities will align perfectly with both his domestic as well as his external agenda. So I think the first thing that he would ask from India would be trade concessions and market access. He has already labeled India as a tariff king. And if you remember, even in his first term, he had withdrawn the generalized system of preferences for India that was in play at that time. He had talked about the tariffs on Harley-Davidson, for instance. So we can expect, certainly, that President Trump would want India to lower its tariff barriers and provide greater market access to American companies and American products. That's the first thing. I think the second thing that he would expect from India would be a better harmonization with America on immigration and visa policies. We have already seen that about 18,000 undocumented Indians are said to be returned back to India. And I think that is something that we have accepted, provided their nationality is verified. I think we have no option but to take them back. And that would be a good signal also to the Americans of our good intentions in this regard, because eventually what we want to protect is the H-1B program. This is a program that has yielded very good dividends, both for India and America. It has allowed mobility for our tech talent to go to America and work with the top American companies. And at the same time, it has allowed American economic competitiveness because, Indian tech talent is among the best in the world. I think the third thing that President Trump would ask from India is geopolitical alignment. You started your program by talking about his threat to the BRICS, because I think he's got a bee in his bonnet about BRICS trying to promote an alternative currency and trying to promote de-dollarization. We have, of course, already clarified that our only aim is to expand our policy options, and we have no intention of replacing the dollar. But I think he would want greater geopolitical alignment on the part of India. He would want India to distance itself more from Russia and China and work more closely with the US, not only through the Quad mechanism, but also in general on Indo-Pacific framework. So my broad sense is that these would be the three main areas in which President Trump would seek, some concessions from India.
You spent a lot of time in Canada, Ambassador Swarup, and today India-Canada ties are at their worst possible point. You saw what Donald Trump had to say about Canada, about the European Union. What do you think will be the realignment of US relationship with key allies, including Canada and the European Union?
Yes, I think, of course, much of it is bluster. I do not think that Trump is in any way trying to tear up the transatlantic alliance and completely leave Europe rudderless. Because if you have seen, he has moderated his stance on the Russia-Ukraine war also. At one time, he had said, I will resolve this war within 24 hours. But now he's saying that if Russia does not cooperate, if President Putin does not reciprocate, then he can impose very high tariffs and sanctions on Russia. So my sense is that he is already moderating his position. As far as Europe is concerned, what he really wants is that they should accept greater commitment in terms of defense spending. And in fact, he wants the level to be raised from 2% to 5%. So that is where I think he's going to make a big ask of the Europeans. And I suppose the Europeans will have to adjust their policies in this regard. As far as Canada is concerned, it's very interesting because he keeps on repeating the threat that unless Canada joins the United States as its 51st state, he will impose high tariffs on Canada as early as February 1. I don't think there is any danger of Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. I've lived there, I've served there. And I think one thing that defines Canadians is that they are not Americans. So I don't think that's happening. And there is across the board political support for Canada to retain its independence and its own stance in foreign affairs. My sense is he wants to renegotiate the Canada, US, Mexico trade agreement, which was already renegotiated. If you remember, earlier it was called NAFTA, but in Trump 1.0, it was renegotiated and called USMCA. He wants further concessions from Canada. And I think Canada will have to concede on some aspects because even if they impose their retaliatory tariffs on America, the problem is Canada is very dependent on the American market. 76% of Canada's exports go entirely to the United States. 90% of their oil goes only to the United States, whereas the US only depends on Canada for 17% of its trade. So my sense is that Canada has the weaker hand in this. There will be some negotiations, and eventually my guess is a compromise will be reached.
My final question on the Russia-Ukraine war. When we heard Trump at Davos, he spoke repeatedly about this being a ridiculous war, about how he wants to meet Putin very soon. And he was explicit that many young people are dying in Ukraine. Ukraine is ready for a deal. Putin now needs to agree. Do you think he'd be able to bring this war to an end anytime soon?
Well, we have seen his proclivities as a deal maker. We saw what happened in Gaza, where just the threat that, before his inauguration, there must be a ceasefire, finally convinced Netanyahu to come to the negotiating table and accept an agreement which was in place for the last 13 months. But President Biden was just not able to get him to sign on the dotted line. But President Trump managed to do that. Now, as far as Ukraine is concerned, as I said earlier, it's slightly more knotty. My sense is that President Zelensky has already indicated his willingness to discuss this and to have a negotiated settlement. If President Putin does not come to the negotiating table anytime soon, then I think there'll be a change in Trump's attitude and we might see more sanctions being put on Russia. But eventually, there will be some kind of a negotiated settlement. It all depends on how soon the Trump-Putin summit can be held and what is brought to the table. Because he has said very clearly that both sides will have to make concessions, which means Russia will also have to make concessions, which so far President Putin has not indicated any willingness to do so.
Right. And of course, he'll have to give a face saver and some sort of a win to every side in this negotiation, because that's how deal making always works in the end. Thank you so much, Ambassador Swarup, for joining us on Global Eye with your view on decoding Trump 2.0 now that they are